Okay, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Andy Thomas, our Chief Marketing Officer at Kforce, and I'm absolutely thrilled to offer our expertise through these online webinars. I've been with Kforce for over 20 years and have held many roles here, but I can tell you I can't remember a more exciting or innovative time within our business. For those of you who might not be familiar with Kforce, we're a solutions firm that was established almost 60 years ago. And each year we're providing opportunities for over 30,000 highly talented consultants who are really working with our clients addressing their most significant challenges and opportunities. We do so in the areas of technology and finance and accounting. But the real question today is, why are we all here? And the answer is really our namesake, which is knowledge sharing. In this series, and this is our second of this STEM series that we're doing, you're going to hear advice from Kforce's top experts, and it's designed to help professionals like you begin or advance your STEM career. And with that said, our topic today is how to make a power profile and ace your interview to land your dream job. And I have to tell you, we are very lucky today to have Erin Zoller with us. Now, Erin serves as our VP of Delivery for our consumer and tech vertical. In doing so, Erin leads a team of over 70 recruiters, and they really tend to our largest customers throughout the firm. Erin's a Florida Gator, and it was 13 years ago, Erin? Was it 13 that you
started? In August.
Yeah, so from what I hear, you started on a Saturday. You graduated on a Saturday and started on a Monday.
I sure did. Quick transition.
Well, I would tell you, obviously, we know you're passionate about sourcing, engaging, and placing top talent. But, beyond that, I've spoken to your professional accomplishments, but you are so much more of that. So can you want to speak to the picture that we're putting up right now?
A little scared. Let's see what it is. Okay. Okay. Yes. So my husband and I, we live in Florida, right? We have great freshwater lakes, and we are bass fishing champions. I figured this would come up, so I did bring in my office. I have one of my little trophies here. But yes, very passionate also about bass fishing.
Very nice, very nice. So, that being said, before we really jump in, okay, the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session are going to be for Q&A. So there's not going to be Q&A throughout this. On the right-hand side of your screen is a Q&A box where you can type and submit your questions throughout the presentation. We'll try to respond to as many of them as we can at the end. We may not get to all of them. Beyond that, in a couple days, what you'll receive is an email from us with a recording of today's webinar, links to register for the last session in this STEM series. There'll be more after that. And to enlist your feedback, and please know that's going to be very, very important to us around that. So with that said, I'll turn it over to you, Erin, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Again, really excited to be here and talking through these topics today. As Andy mentioned, I have close to August will be 13 years in the IT staffing and solutions industry. And the one thing that never gets old for me is these topics that we're really blessed to be able to help candidates with, being that coach, that agent, so to speak, to, help facilitate and prep our candidates and our consultants for one of the most really hardest life decisions that they have to make, right, is their career. So something I'm really, really passionate about. So in the first STEM webinar that Adam Lombardi walked through, he did a really great deep dive into the current STEM landscape. So we learned about industry trends and how today's market is changing. In today's session, I'm really going to focus on 3 critical topics when it comes to identifying and then securing your dream job within the STEM industry. And I think something to note too is some of these are just really great overall best practices. It doesn't have to be specific to STEM. So the first of which is creating what we're calling a power profile, right? and a power profile, not only from a resume perspective, but thinking about all of the all-encompassing things that make up your brand. That includes social media, work samples, everything that can be something that a potential employer will see and that you want them to see. We'll walk through tips and tricks of your online brand and how to stay connected and informed within the STEM community without that being overwhelming. And then, of course, navigating the interview process. And right now, our new world of really virtual interviews. So, LinkedIn released a stat recently saying that 54% of job seekers are saying the interview phase is moderate to extremely challenging, and that's due to lack of confidence and uncertainty. So, we want to be able to boost that confidence level up and talk through how to best prepare for a successful interview in a highly competitive field. So we're going to hit a lot of things in a rapid fire environment. As Andy mentioned, please feel free to chat in your questions. We're happy to discuss at the end. All right, so we're first going to start with the really first ingredient of this power profile, and that is the resume. We get a lot of questions, especially lately, of, is a resume really that important? Do I have to have a resume? Do I have to update my resume? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We are in an environment right now that's different than we've ever seen. Unemployment has rose higher in 3 months of COVID-19 than it did in 2 years of the Great Recession. Unemployment jumped from 6.2 million in February to 20.5 million in May, right? So in today's climate, there's a lot of folks out there who probably haven't had to think about or even touch their resume in 1, 5, 10 years. So imagine that process of going to sit down and try and remember all those details to highlight and what people really want to see, right? So if you look at, to start, the graph on the left, really wanting to showcase some data points around a one-page versus a multi-page resume and what's going to be the best recipe for you. Data will suggest that a multi-page resume, including at minimum a second page, gives you a higher probability to secure a more senior role. And that makes sense, right? It's showing career progression, it's showing your total experience. You may find that there are certain clients that may have resume like cutoff limits or page recommendations. And when you come across that, it's good to work through that process of what you can trim up. But to start, especially if you're someone where it's like, I really don't know where to start or what I should be focusing on, you should be less worried about the number of pages and really focused in on the content itself. What's the content of the resume and what story are you trying to tell? So as you may have heard, if you joined Adam's webinar, which I'm sure most of you did, the disciplines of STEM specifically are constantly blurring. The gap between science, technology, engineering, math, they're shrinking, right? And the job market reflects that. So when you're going to highlight your STEM specific experience on your resume, you want to be sure to emphasize your familiarity with various disciplines together when that's applicable. There's a couple of high level key points that we wanted to hit specifically on the resume. And the first is really not assuming that everyone knows what you're talking about, right? There are various entry points that you may need to get through before your profile gets seen by that ultimate decision maker, right? The ultimate hiring manager who you're going to be reporting to. So you want to try and keep all audiences in mind, right? Some of those may be like more system-based audiences, ATS, which is an applicant tracking system. Thinking about SEO, right? How many times are you saying specific things and how that helps build your profile to be at the top of the deck. Going through a chat bot, even thinking about, going through maybe a barrier that's a non-technical audience that doesn't fully understand the impact and the reach without being really specific on what you're trying to accomplish. For example, I think in the technology field, we see a lot of times maybe that you are working within a certain technology stack. So it's just assumed that because I'm in this stack, I have XYZ technologies. But this is a great example of something that you don't always want to be left for assumption, right? You want to make sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity to get through various barriers of entry. And you want to be specific on what you have done specifically, right? We kind of joke all the time in, technology, engineering, a lot of the bigger problems that, our consultants are trying to solve, it's a team sport. But you yourself have a role in that team sport. So you want to be specific on your resume about what you have done, in addition to what that helped accomplish for your team, your company, what have you, and try and think of a flow that helps initiate and highlight some of those problems and tell a good story. When we start talking about the actual interview process itself, we'll hit on something called the STAR methodology. So it'll be good to go back and make sure you feel like you've done your due diligence on your resume to tell that great story in a really good systematic way. And I know we mentioned it could be an arduous process, right? If you're not used to coming back and remembering all of these things from a resume perspective, one best practice from one of my former leaders is to keep some sort of repository of your own accomplishments, milestones, new technology, new environments that you've implemented or migrated over. And it's always great to reference back. Then you have something that you can go to really help kind of upskill yourself, upskill your resume, and never feel like you're always just starting from scratch. Even if you're joining this call and you're not on the job market today, it's a good best practice to make sure that your online profile and your resume, continuously update the experiences that you have. So if that helps anyone. Plus, it's always just great if you're having a bad day and you want to look through all of the great things that you've done. So lastly, on the resume front, we recommend really cross-referencing the jobs that you're applying to and making sure that you're doing your absolute best to showcase that experience you have versus what they're looking for, especially when it comes to desired skills. So oftentimes, you may be filling out your resume and trying to make it a point of all of your accomplishments and tools and technologies, and maybe you see this job that you're super interested in and you're really really excited about. Before you click apply, right before you attach that resume, make sure you go through line by line. There's a lot of times people think about, and we hear all the time from our candidates, oh, I did that exact same role at XYZ company. Look back at XYZ company. Are you sure that that is super clear? And sometimes it doesn't have to be drastic changes, right? It could just be something in the flow. There's something that maybe you can be a bit more specific on with technology, or even just the overall size and scope of the environment, right? The consumers that you reach, the partners or vendors that you worked with, all things that you really want to think, especially if you're applying for roles that obviously you have a high interest in. I think the interesting point there is, on the flip side, as industry experts, we're educating our clients to do the same thing, right? We're helping them build more dynamic job descriptions to attract the best talent, to stop using off of the shelf job descriptions from HR years ago that haven't been updated, right? So we're helping them tailor it to their groups and really make sure that they're telling their story of what they're trying to accomplish, both technical and non-technical. So I just think that's an interesting kind of perspective to share when we talk about the concept of, does it make sense to tailor your resume? Interestingly enough, we had the opportunity to survey about 2,200 actual live applicants coming to kforce.com applying for jobs. And we asked them, do you customize your resume for every job that you apply to? And you can see from the pie chart in the bottom left-hand corner, 16% of those responders said yes, 47% said sometimes, and 34% said no. So again, in the Q&A section, if anyone has any comments or overall questions that we want to hit, happy to hear, but I just thought that was some interesting data points to share. So before we move on from the resume perspective, we wanted to also just hit some more best practices, right? You got to think about this not just as a static piece of paper, right, that has to be in a specific format. It really is an opportunity for you to show not only your experience, but a little peek into your personality, right? And that can all start from a really powerful, all-encompassing summary. And the summary is just that. It's a great summation of your career, your progression, your skill expertise, and then also where you want to go. And you want to make sure that you can really articulate articulately get that across to your audience. And the summary is a great way to do that. You can obviously see from the bullet points, just again, some overall tips. We won't hit every single one of them. A couple ones that I did want to call out specifically: the keyword strategy. And again, remembering all of those barriers to entry. Are you saying all of the right things? Are you saying them consistently? Have we specifically called out technologies and not left anything to be assumed? Thinking about that organization and flow, and potentially following what we'll talk about in a couple slides upcoming, the STAR methodology. Whenever possible, showing external links to your work, especially if you have an engaging audience that's looking at your resume, looking at your work history, and you can link back, right, to see specific examples and examples that you're really proud of. And that could be a design portfolio, anything from a code repository standpoint. External links to show your work are a great representation, and also kind of just leaves the reader, right, like wanting more. If I see a hyperlink on something, I'm going to click on it. And lastly, and it may seem so minimal, but don't overlook the details, because the details can be a make or break factor. And what we mean by that is spelling, grammar, little things. If you're bulleting your resume, are your bullets in the same format? If you're using bullets, do you put periods at the end of the sentence? And if you did you do that in every single bullet? We talk a lot about just technology and how competitive it is, but at the core foundation, a lot of what our customers are asking for, specifically in STEM, it's a high level of attention to detail. It's a high level of process-oriented type work, right? And what better way that they can look at the attention to detail than your resume? So don't overlook some of those small things, and really make sure that you've got your flow, your organization, and then everything checks out from a spelling and grammatical perspective. All right. So now that our resume is built and or updated, one thing that we cannot overlook is just how important of a component to your power profile that your online brand is. There is really no getting around this in today's day and age. Your online presence will likely be the first thing potential employers look at to find more information about you outside of the resume. So this can include anything from a LinkedIn profile, a portfolio, as we mentioned, code repositories, or any social media outlet, right? So in a similar poll of our recent Kforce applicants, we asked them what website was used for the most of their job search. And the answer, which 66%, as you can see at the bottom, responded with, was LinkedIn. So with that said alone, you have to be cognizant of, if you're looking at them through those avenues, they're absolutely looking at you through those avenues, right? And some good things to think about when you think about your online brand: it's not just about a picture and a summary and a work history. It's about who you're following and who's following you. Mutual connections are it can be really powerful. The latest data would suggest that employee referrals and networking sites are the top two ways companies find candidates to fill open positions. From my seat, I would absolutely echo the same thing. I 100% agree with this stat. We put so much emphasis in our Kforce family, our consultants, and take very seriously when we get referrals from them, right? Because they know what it takes to be successful in the job that they're in. And we know the background of their prior companies that they've worked at in order to be successful in their new position. So it's a great way to see and get connected to other people. It's not about how many followers you have or who you're following, but it's just about getting out there and making some of those connections. And you'd be really surprised what a mutual connection can do, especially when you're sitting across from someone who is now a potential decision maker in your employment at their company, and you have all of these mutual connections together. It could be a really great talking point in an interview. Some other things to think about are likes and appreciations, right? Especially when you have those sites where your portfolio, your design work, your code is out there and published. It's always good to, kind of see what you're liking, right? It shows a little bit like a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, of what you're passionate about, what you're excited about, what kudos you give to other folks in the community, and, maybe what advice that you would give, especially if there's something on a code repository type site. So likes and appreciations can be really just insightful to see, and also, of course, get you connected to other like-minded people within the community. And as you can see from Adam Lombardi's online profile, even just little personality cues, right? Your Twitter handle. We've seen some very witty ones in technology specifically, and your LinkedIn summary. It's you're limited to how many characters you have in socially sometimes to really tell a lot about yourself, and you're trying to hit what you do, what you want to do, but you want to give a little just insight in who you are as a person. And my LinkedIn summary, I talk a lot about what I do at Kforce because I love what I do, but I try to just give a little snippet of myself and my family and what we like to do and bass fishing. And you'd be surprised what that can do for you, especially if you have some of those common connections and interests when you get to the interview phase. So the personality cues are definitely very, very key. On top of that, little things like groups, schools. Andy mentioned I'm a Gator. I'm a very proud Gator. I follow a lot of their groups, and I definitely notice when there's other Gators in the crowd on LinkedIn. It's not just the work history that stands out. So that's definitely something to think about when you kind of look to either, if you haven't built your online profile so far, if you're constantly looking for ways to update, that would be a good kind of slow dip in the water, right? What other groups can you mention? What are some other folks doing, that you are connected to, and who are those mutual connections? It's kind of a great way to start slowly building your network and brand. Just staying connected with what's happening in your field is really, really important. You don't have to be a social influencer, so to speak, to stay informed and connected. I would leverage the help of notifications, LinkedIn notifications, their mobile app. There's really great content aggregator sites out there, such as like a Hootsuite, that can, put all of the streams that you want to follow, the companies that you want to follow in one place, and you get like a live stream going. So if you're like me and you want to ingest content at a certain time, it's a great way to just stay informed and connected and go to one place. Obviously, things like tailored news apps where you can select what you want to receive alerts for. Those are all good ways that you can stay up to speed of what's going on in the market today. And it's definitely a best practice to try and continue this learning and growing your network proactively, right? You don't necessarily want to wait until it's crunch time and you absolutely need a job. You can, of course, but it's always great to do it proactively. Grow your network, constantly look at what your brand is saying and what your image is on social media, and just have an active presence in online communities. Even if that's just liking or sharing or just a quick comment every once in a while, it definitely will go a long way. Great profile, Adam. All right, so we've talked about the importance of your power profile, your online presence, that hopefully the culmination of those two will help you secure an interview. Now we're in that process, right? We've got the interview. We're going to chat through best practices around how to best prepare. So starting with just the word prepare, right? The prep and research is so important. So if you think back to the social piece, you want to make sure you research the company, you research the interviewers that you're going to be speaking with. What are your common connections? Do you have any? What does their work history look like? Have they had a similar environment or a similar upbringing from a IT perspective as you have? And as you're kind of going through the research process, writing down these questions that you want to make sure that you get answered. Good research is really going to help prep you for, some of those questions, and that just shows your interest level. Because as much as employers are gauging if you're the right fit for them, you absolutely need to be doing the same. It has to be a mutual connection on both sides. And if you're going into an interview blind and not fully understanding, what the company does or what initiatives are in this group or who are the people that you're even talking to, that's going to be really hard for you to do. And when it comes to the actual interview prep itself, the best advice I can give is just practice, 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 right? Some of these classic, most frequently asked questions, especially I would say, more starter questions to an interview, right? And you want to be able to know how to answer them. So questions like, Tell me a little bit about yourself. What brings you to XYZ company? Explain what you've been doing in your last role, right? Those are not meant to stump you, right? There's no right or wrong answer. It's about you. But if you're answering those for the first time, it may feel a little clunky, right? And you have a lot to offer. So make sure you practice and rehearse some of those questions that you absolutely anticipate on getting. We always like to work with our candidates and we go line by line in the job description and role play line by line. If you were get to ask on XYZ, how do you build a process workflow? Let's talk about that. Let's role play that. If you can go line by line and formulate ideas of how you would articulate your experience, not only with those skill sets, but technologies, processes, maybe it even brings up a challenging time. That is also a frequently asked question when it comes to the interview process is, tell me about a difficult time or a specific challenge and how you got through it. And sometimes you can really pull that if you're taking the time to really go line by line and make sure you have something to say to each question if asked. It is a great best practice if you are partnering with a recruiter and you haven't gone through that process before to practice with him or her. Get the information that they have prior to any interviews, right? They should hopefully have history on the client that you're interviewing. They have a relationship. They may be able to give you just personality tips and styles, right? Everyone has a different style of interviewing. It can hopefully help you if someone that may be a little bit more direct in their questioning versus an interview that's going to be open and casual. So absolutely work with your recruiter to go through the role play and the practice, but making sure you understand some of those personality traits of who you're speaking with. And doing all of these things, right, taking the time, it's just going to ensure that you have confident delivery to your questions. If you find yourself not feeling as confident, right, or maybe you got a longer winded question and you just want to make sure that you're answering it appropriately, you can always repeat their question before answering to give you time to kind of formulate your best response, but also seek validation. It's totally fine. Did that answer your question? Can I provide any more detail? That's okay to ask those follow-ups. It doesn't show a sign of weakness. You're just validating, did I answer your question or can I elaborate? And be prepared to show your work. Hopefully, again, you are up to speed and you wouldn't be put into any rapid fire situation of a coding exercise or building a process workflow right then and there, but you might, right? And you want to be prepared for everything, especially if you have work that's published out there, if you have code that's out there, if you have an online design portfolio. You need to be prepared to talk through your work and stuff that you're very passionate about, you're really proud of, but being able to show your work as well. And my absolute favorite, I know I referenced it a little bit ago, just around a great way to organize your thoughts and flow is the STAR methodology, right? STAR, when we say STAR, we mean situation, task, action, and result. And when you think about this from an interview perspective, the situation, right? You're disclosing details of a specific event, initiative, problem. The task, you're explaining your responsibility to that situation. So again, think back when we were talking about building a good resume and you're being very specific about what you've done. You're helping the overall situation, but what you've done to that task. The action describes how you accomplish the task. And that can be through tools, technology, process, research. There can be a multitude of things that comes to action. And then the result. And the result is the best one, right? It's the outline of the impact to your actions. So what was the outcome? And it can be things like increased revenue, customer satisfaction, turnaround time. I mean, the possibilities are endless, obviously, based on where you've worked, but it's a great way to really, again, organize your thoughts and make sure that you're answering their questions, but almost going one step above. Here is the problem that I was helping solve, and here is the result. It's a great way to just make sure that you're putting that extra emphasis on the impact that you've reached through technology, innovation, what have you. So I would kind of go back through, now that we explained the STAR methodology in a bit more detail, and make sure that your resume is kind of speaking to that flow. When you're practicing for interviews, you're practicing answering in the STAR methodology if you can. And where you have gaps, maybe go back and, just re-practice in case it comes up again. Lastly, when we're thinking about interviews and how to really be confident, how to really ace them, connection is key, right? Especially in today's virtual world, we may not be directly shaking someone's hand, but you absolutely can look them in the eye on video, right? You can be present. You can have that personality even in your online brand that we talked about that opens up some of those connections. And, maybe it's a school, maybe it's a passion, but we're not going to get away from the virtual interview concept. And the interesting stat that you guys are seeing right now is virtual interviews. 47% of companies have turned to video interviewing technologies to shorten their hiring time. So this was something we've seen before COVID and the pandemic happened, right? COVID has definitely forced some companies that maybe weren't as progressive in video interviewing technologies to switch to that model. But especially in technology, especially in STEM, video interviews, have really been around for quite some time, right? You want to shorten the hiring process. You're in a very competitive environment. You've got a lot of remote work now that is open. You've got candidates that are highly relocatable. So the virtual interview is really here to stay. So as much as we put emphasis on the prep for the interview itself, the types of questions, how to formulate your answers, you really got to think about the prep also including your space and your surroundings and, where you are mentally. So having things like backup audio, headset, your connection, just making sure that your space is put together, right? And, you're like millions of others operating in a virtual environment, and you're in a normal household with distractions and kids and pets. So, and especially if you don't have a designated office space, that prep in advance is going to make you feel, I think, less nervous, especially in a virtual interview. And you really want to not worry about those little things. You want to focus on virtually articulating your experience to be able to build that connection. So things like quiet places, having your setup to where you've got your resume, you've got your notes, so you can make that eye contact, jot your notes down, and then also the questions that you've been able to prep ahead of time. So, all good things to think about, especially when you're in a virtual environment. I would be remiss if I didn't mention just an overall thank you and follow up post interview. And it's not just thanking them for their time. Obviously, we want to do that, but you're thanking them and you're highlighting what you heard in the interview. Not only what you heard in the interview, but how excited you are based on what you've heard and the experience that you have and what you can bring to the table. And all that shows is you're interested in the opportunity, right? But you heard them. You were listening. You weren't focused on trying to get your answer out to impress them. And you have a genuine interest of wanting to help solve their problems, right? You want to be a part of their team. So when we talk a little bit about, from a resume perspective, it's those little things that can be make or break, like spelling and grammar. This I would put up there as well, right? It's a little thing. It's a make or break, may not be a make or break, but it makes someone feel good. And they could remember you that way, especially if they've just gone through a full day of interviews and you're the first one that comes up with a thank you note and articulating that experience and how well you may be to be an asset for their team. So just something to think about. I know we've hit a lot in a very short amount of time. We want to make sure we leave good times for questions, but just to summarize everything that we've talked about, the importance of building your power profile, right? Through great storytelling, through a targeted resume, and really looking at the social information that you're putting out there, whether that's work, whether that's your LinkedIn profile, making sure that it's a representation of not only what you're doing, but what you want to be doing. Having that online presence, just being socially aware and getting yourself out there. Maybe that's someone, if you're on this webinar today and saying, I wish I had more time for that. I really need to make time for content or getting myself out there or joining more groups, and no better time than to start now. Obviously, when you're getting to the interview phase, just really focusing on practice, 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 right? You don't want to go in blind, especially when it's in such a highly competitive field and a challenging field like the STEM industry is. And of course, just making sure that you're prepared for that virtual interview. And if at all possible, staying connected to a recruiting professional for additional help and industry knowledge. That's what we are here for. We are your agents. We are your champions. We will help you through this process, give you honest advice, and really see it through. So if you are on here today and you haven't partnered with Kforce or worked with a recruiter, I absolutely recommend it. It really is just that extra layer of support to make sure that you are landing that dream opportunity. So by now, you've heard about the current landscape in STEM from Adam Lombardi. We obviously just talked about, some steps and tips and tricks to help you land your dream opportunity. Our third and final webinar series will be with Sandy Marin, who I've known for years, and he's going to be talking about building your existing skills and growing your career to succeed in today's environment. So please be sure to check it out. It's been an honor to talk through this with you guys today, and Andy, I look forward to our questions.
Yes. All right, so we're going to open it up a little bit, and I've got a few questions for you already. And
okay.
So we'll start out. We're going to go pretty basic with the first question. Besides LinkedIn, where else should I post my resume?
You can use a various amount of sites, and I would recommend just, being out there as much as you can, especially if you're active in the job market. LinkedIn is great. It's a great way to connect with people socially and get a little bit more about them. Indeed is a great resource, very, very large reach. If you're in the technology field, resume engines like Dice or even Career Builder. Career Builder has a really interesting, new platform that is social aggregation technology. So even posting your resume on Career Builder, from an employer perspective, they can now search and type in that same search, so to speak, and then pull up also your social information. So if you do have any of those code repositories, as we mentioned, or other things like that. So Career Builder is definitely one that seems high in the industry. You really can't go wrong because there's so many different avenues, but I would highly recommend just not being in one specific. So if you're just in LinkedIn, try Indeed, try Career Builder, try a couple others, and just see the responses that you're getting and if that's helping.
Yeah, I would say, it's a land, sea, and air approach, isn't it? And
exactly.
With that, one of the ones that has surprisingly come along is, I think people think of Glassdoor as a group that attracts sentiment and follows sentiment, packages it, and a place to rate companies, but it's also quite a source for candidates.
Yeah.
And in line with the ones you had mentioned earlier.
It's funny too, we talked about this stat and one of the slides about, where do you go for your job search? And LinkedIn was the predominant answer, 66%, but right behind it was Indeed, right behind Indeed was Glassdoor. So it's, a great example. You really cannot go wrong putting yourself out there in all of those forums.
So, Erin, another one coming in. Do you recommend changing the resume for each specific opportunity?
It really just depends. I think you have to go back and, like we said, before you submit that, apply button, look at the opportunity itself and cross-reference with your resume. Are you telling the story that they're asking for? And when I was talking earlier about especially looking at desired skills, I think some people say, okay, like if that comes up on an interview, I have that, I can talk through that. But you got to think of a hiring manager's mindset, right? Or like we talked about those entry points, they're going to look for a 10 first, right? So if you have it, put it out there. So it may not be for every position, but I would recommend you doing that gut check of, I'm applying for this role. Am I doing myself a disservice by not being more articulate about what I've done in relation to that?
Absolutely. All right. Interesting one. How do you negotiate salary in this environment if you've been given an offer?
So it is an interesting one. This is one, and I will answer from a recruiting perspective when we talk about the benefits of partnering with an industry professional, right? We have a lot of intelligence around what the market is bearing, around what our clients are offering, and we can help you through that process. And we work with you specifically, right? Because you want to go and get into an interview process and not have to worry about salary. You don't want to say, wow, I love that interview. I hope I get the job. They offer you the job, and now you're in this negotiation process and you're back and forth. You want to make sure you think through everything that goes into your compensation expectations. And if you're partnering with a recruiter, you guys work on that together. Or if you're working with a client directly, you just make it clear, right? Of what is going to be your, we talk about MVP all the time here, right? What is your minimally viable product? What is your expectation on comp? Because you want it to be a celebration at time of offer. You don't want it to be a time of frustration. So my best advice is to really have those conversations up front and really know where you're flexible. You yourself, are you hard in the line of a certain compensation expectation? Or do you have flexibility based on cultural environment, the type of company, commute, remote? A lot of those factors do play into it, especially when you think about benefits, PTO. So really, again, do your research and make sure you're finding what's right for you before you get too far down the line.
Well, it's interesting. You earlier were speaking to the customizing of the resume, and as you did that, some further detailed questions about that came in. That's why I love this real time and environment. So thoughts on this? It's half commentary, half questions. If I keep customizing my resume, how can I reference it when I get callbacks? Or I have
Absolutely.
dozens of versions of it.
Absolutely. And I think, when I looked at the 34% of no's, that's the first thing that popped in my mind. It's probably really challenging for people to remember all of these customizations that they made. What I would recommend, and it sounds so simple, but as you're saving the updates that you make to the resume, save it, either name it to the client that you're working with or that you're applying to, right? So I would say K-Force, Aaron Zoller, and maybe house it in a certain folder, whether that's your desktop or however you house your documents. But it will keep you organized to where you can say, okay, here's my original version, Aaron Zoller, and here's what I said for K-Force, and here's what I said for XYZ company. Again, it may not be major customizations, but you do want to make sure if you get that call back or you're in an interview and they're looking at a resume, that it's the one that obviously you specifically tailored for their opportunity.
Excellent. So the other one was saying, hey, in comparing the two, keep it consistent or customize it. What I'm hearing you say through this is definitely customize it, but in doing so, you got to be paying attention and you got to keep track
Absolutely.
of what you're putting out there.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Is a cover letter necessary for each job application?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is a cover letter necessary for each job application?
It's funny. So I did a webinar for Witty and I got a lot of questions on cover letters. So I really don't see them often. Again, I've worked here 13 years, and I don't think we've ever used a cover letter. I would focus more again on the content of your resume. And when you think about a cover letter, it's making your intentions clear and what you want to do, but you can do that through other social channels. I think right now with how many things that we have at our fingertips to get to know someone before we speak to them, I would not put emphasis on a cover letter.
Cool. Efficiency. I
Yes.
love this question. Is there any website that can match job description keywords versus your resume?
Honestly, I think the best thing to do is look at and start. We talk to our recruiters about this all the time. Start with a big funnel, right? Look at Google. Google a basic, job description that you're looking for. Don't worry about the company. Don't worry about whoever. Just see like what are those most frequently used terms, right? And then develop your keyword strategy. Because maybe you're seeing, my mom's a business analyst, so I'll use her as an example. Requirements gathering. But then maybe you start to see some other words that can kind of filter in there and you're like, oh, I was doing that. And I think that's what they're referring to. So if you start your funnel big in your research process by even just Google, LinkedIn, Indeed, jobs, it will give you some good perspective to then try and find maybe those more specific sites or some other examples of how you can find those keywords.
If I apply to jobs and don't even get a rejection email, is my application dead on arrival?
It is not dead on arrival. It's always a good best practice. You will see a lot of times, an automated response to get your application. One thing to note, I mean, especially now we talk about how competitive the field is. There are at times within a matter of minutes of a job being posted, there can be a slew of applicants. I mean, a slew of them. So obviously you want to be patient. It's not dead on arrival, but it is okay to have some diligent follow-up, especially if you got a response back and it's not an auto response that's going to go into, get a kickback message. You want to make sure you're doing your due diligence to show how excited you are about the opportunity. And hopefully there's some sort of, and now I can speak from a Kforce perspective, where we've got a system that will alert us, right? We've got auto matching capabilities to where we really want to prioritize, right, our applicants to these roles. So no, please don't assume that you're dead on arrival.
Erin, how do you get past ATS systems?
ATS systems, I would almost offer the advice to change the mentality of them. They're not these systems that are here to block you. They're actually here to support you and get you more opportunities than maybe just the one that you applied for, right? And in our ATS system, we have the ability to search and use machine learning and algorithms to loop in. And that same example, if I'm saying requirements gathering, it's going to give me 20 different ways that I could say that. And if you're within the ATS, I can find you for opportunities that you didn't even know existed, right? That I know from my client perspective, I'm going to have upcoming. So you don't necessarily want to try and get around them. You want to partner. You want to be in one and make sure as soon as you have a connection point, whether that's with a recruiter, with a company, you set expectations on follow-up. You ask for advice so you can make sure that you're always kind of making sure that your profile is updated and getting seen. But you don't necessarily want to get around it. I mean, you definitely want to partner so that you can get noticed and seen, but I think there's a different way to potentially look at that.
Excellent. Here's a topical one. I put a bullet under my latest experience that COVID-19 ended my program and the job. Is this okay to have that on your resume?
It's okay to have on the resume. I would probably recommend taking that off the resume and just being able to speak to it, right? When you get to the interview stage, we talked about those most commonly answered questions. When people say what brings you to Kforce, what brings you to XYZ company, that's a good time to put a summation of your experience, but also say why your last opportunity ended. It's unfortunate, but it's real, right? It's happened to a lot of people. But I wouldn't necessarily take up space or real estate on your resume when you have so much to offer, because you can definitely explain that.
Here's one that hits home for us. I'm seeing some jobs with a short 6-month contracts. Being unemployed, I'm tempted to take them. Would taking something that short look bad on a resume in the experience section?
No, not necessarily. Especially you got to think, if you're in IT, well, I guess I'll back up. You never want to assume, right? It could be listed as 6 months, but there could be way more to that story, right? So if you're at least open to that contract, right? Go ahead and learn more about that opportunity. And especially in the technology space, contracting is normal, right? You have these big companies that go through initiatives or new technology implementations, and maybe it's not something that they are going to put in their environment forever, and they want to hire that contract work. They want to use partners and help them with that type of work that they're trying to accomplish, and it's easier for them to outsource that and us take on all of the. I'm talking about obviously someone like Kforce, but it absolutely would not look terrible from an employment history perspective. You're fulfilling the work of what you're asked to do. And in technology, let's be honest, right? Oftentimes they're over budget and delayed. So you do see a lot of opportunity to extend. And you got to think too, if you perform well within a contract model, you absolutely would probably be one of the first people that they look at for, full-time openings. And we see that a lot in our contractors too, that turn into now full-time employees and have been there for years. So I wouldn't let that scare you.
Interesting one here. Are you hurting yourself by revealing your compensation expectation before you interview? Meaning if you're asked.
So if you're asked, I wouldn't say you're hurting yourself, right? You're managing expectations. If you're working with a recruiter, it's a little bit of an easier conversation, right? We're your agent, we're your advocate. We really need to know that information so we can educate you and work on the best thing for you. If you're working directly with a company, it's not hurting yourself by any means. By this point, you should also be pretty aware of what their salary expectations are. You can see that as you apply to jobs, oftentimes. So I wouldn't necessarily think about it as hurting, because no matter what, even if you have those flexibility points, you have a certain expectation of where you can't go below of, right? And you need to make that clear to them. Again, when you think back of, just as important as it is for them to bring on someone that they want to bring on a team, it has to be the right fit for you. And there's no way around it. Compensation is important, right? So you have to make sure that it's going to be the right fit for you, your family, whatever your situation is.
How much emphasis is given if there are gaps in months in the working career? Will a candidate get dropped in the first filter itself?
No. And there's, I can speak specifically to our technology that we have at Kforce. We don't even have a filter that would necessarily seek out gaps, right? Like there is nothing that can do that. So it's not. I wouldn't say it'd be anything to worry about. If it is something that you're concerned about, my best advice is to talk about it, right? Talk to either your recruiter or your potential employer and talk through that. We have a lot of people that have made different career choices. They have stopped their professional career to start a family, and that's nothing to be ashamed of, right? You're just telling your experience and where you are today. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about, trying to make it through any sort of system, or, if that's going to hurt you or not. You just want to be open and honest about where you were and where you are now.
Yeah, I think when it starts to hurt is when it's a repeating pattern over time.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the isolated instance.
Right.
With everybody working remote, what is the best way to follow up? Phone call or email?
I think the best way to follow up is when you set expectations in the beginning and ask what's the best way to follow up. You just want to be clear with whoever you're following up with, what's their preferred method of communication. Some people will say email. Some people will say, give me a call, and then say a specific time. Some people may say text. I know for me, like, I'm probably better texter than I am over the phone. So I think whatever you set up front should be your preferred method of communication. And it's a good best practice to ask that as well.
All right, so I'm going to give you the standard tough one. Okay. I was once asked in an interview, what is your weakness? It would be great if you can provide some insight on this question. I mean, nobody wants to put their negatives in front of an interviewer. Too much of a perfectionist? Is that what we're supposed to say?
No, because let's be honest, we all have weaknesses. They have weaknesses when they ask you that question, right? That is one that I would put in that same repertoire of like how you would answer that, right? There's actually in our job search guide that we've published, we put that in a STAR method of like how you would answer what your weakness is, but you want to be able to say something, whether that's a technology, maybe a confident, whatever it may be, but follow up with what you're doing to fix that. The fact that you're even just aware that that's a weakness, and here are the steps that you're working on to get better at that, and what you've done so far, that shows initiative, that shows courage, and it's not something to be afraid of, because we're not perfect.
Yeah, it's. I believe it's an opportunity as well to build some credibility, because to your point, we need to be authentic.
Right. And especially through the virtual interview piece, right? You don't want to be a robot on the other side of the screen. I mean, and they can see your thought process thinking through of how you would answer that, right? And what your body language is, the inflection in your voice, and that, yeah, you're a human, right? So it's all good.
Great point. Should you still apply even if you don't meet every requirement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if it's something that you're interested in, because think about it, they're going to ask for everything under the sun, right? And I refer to this a lot of on I have weird analogies when it comes to recruiting and jobs and whatnot, but like you're always going to want the world, but what may be realistic and where you settle on and things that could come up in the interview process and your research process could be things that they weren't even thinking about when they wrote the job description. I've seen people take roles that on paper looked like the maybe least qualified candidate, but their exposure, their partnerships, their communication, how they gelled with the team trumped all of that. So definitely do not be afraid if you don't check every box.
We've got room for one more. I am dyslexic and therefore have trouble with spelling and grammar. Should I tell the interviewer, or I think you can pick it up from there?
Yep. I think it's good, especially again if you're partnering with a recruiter, to share some of those, and we can help coach and whatnot. If it's to the point where you're feeling maybe like it needs to be discussed potentially, but if it doesn't come up, I wouldn't worry too much about it. That could be maybe something that you put as just like a vulnerable moment within your thank you note of how you're really trying to be articulate and make sure that your spelling was correct on whatever you could have been sharing or your resume, but it's something that that you have or that you're suffering from. I think that that's fair, but I wouldn't again necessarily worry about it up front unless you're partnering with someone like a recruiter that you can share that and use them more as like a coach and mentor of how to get through it.
Excellent. Now, Erin, I can't thank you enough for the wisdom shared today. It's clear that everybody who tuned in can now apply these things to starting their career in STEM. But I also want to thank everybody who joined us for the discussion today. We hope that you can block time to join the upcoming webinar that Erin highlighted with Sandy Marin, one of our K4 stars. As I did mention at the beginning of the session, these will all be recorded. And they'll be placed on our website for viewing. And once again, guys, we do look forward to your feedback. That's how we'll get better. So thanks to everybody and have a great day.
Thank you, guys.